I don't remember the first time I stayed late at the office. It must have been sometime during my first year, when I was still trying to prove that I deserved the position I had been hired for. But somewhere along the way, staying late stopped being an exception and became who I was. My colleagues would leave at 6, and I would still be sitting there at 9, at 10, sometimes at midnight, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of cleaning carts my only company. I told myself that this was what success looked like, that if I gave everything, if I became irreplaceable, eventually it would pay off. For a long time, I actually believed it. I built things in that company that no one else bothered to build. There was the internal deadline tracking system, for example. I wasn't even asked to do it. I just got tired of watching projects spiral into chaos because managers couldn't remember when contracts were due. I spent 2 months coding in the evenings, creating an automated reminder tool that flagged risks weeks before they became disasters. When it went live, people stopped missing deadlines. Clients stopped threatening to pull their accounts. Nobody asked where it had come from, but I didn't mind. I knew. Then there was the account I saved 2 summers ago. One of our biggest clients was ready to walk after a catastrophic error left their shipment stranded at a port overseas. Everyone panicked, and Jessica, my boss, told me flatly in a team meeting, "Do whatever you can, Claire, but don't expect miracles." I worked 3 days straight with barely any sleep, coordinating time zones, negotiating with port authorities, rewriting logistics models, even covering expenses myself for a temporary storage facility until finance approved the budget. The client stayed. And not only did they stay, but they signed a renewed 3-year contract. At the time, Jessica patted me on the shoulder and said, "Good job." That was it. Not a raise, not recognition in front of the team, just 2 words that sounded more like an afterthought than gratitude. But I didn't complain. I thought that was what loyalty meant. Doing the work, swallowing the disappointment, waiting patiently for the day when someone would finally acknowledge it all. So when the email went out that a senior manager position was opening, my heart actually skipped. It felt like the universe was finally giving me my chance. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the email on my screen, my hands trembling slightly as I clicked apply. I thought of all those nights I had gone home so late that the buses had stopped running and I had to call a cab. I thought of the weekends when my friends went on trips and I stayed behind to finish reports. I thought of birthdays and anniversaries I had missed, the meals I ate out of vending machines, the notebooks filled with ideas that had saved the company millions. This was supposed to be it. My moment. The week leading up to my meeting with Jessica, I prepared like my life depended on it. I reviewed every project I had ever worked on, every initiative I had led, every time I had pulled the company back from the brink. I created a binder, yes, an actual binder, detailing my contributions. It had charts showing client retention before and after my system launched, spreadsheets proving the revenue from contracts I had salvaged, even testimonials from clients who had written to thank me. I carried that binder with me into her office, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Jessica didn't even look at it. Her office was pristine as always, all white walls and glass shelves, displaying awards that had her name on them but my work behind them. She gestured for me to sit, her expression neutral in that unnerving way she had perfected. I launched into my speech anyway, because I had rehearsed it 100 times in my head. I talked about the systems I had created, the clients I had retained, the growth I had supported. I explained how my knowledge of operations and my ability to stay calm under pressure made me a strong candidate for leadership. For 5 minutes, she let me speak. Then she shut her laptop with a soft click, folded her hands, and gave me a small, almost pitying smile. "Claire," she said, "your work is adequate." I swear my chest actually tightened at that word. Adequate. She could have told me I wasn't good enough. She could have said I needed more time. But adequate? That was worse. Adequate meant forgettable, replaceable. Like the hours and years of my life I had poured into this place amounted to nothing more than a mediocre performance. "You don't have the right qualities for leadership," she went on, her tone sharp but controlled. You're dependable, I'll give you that. But leadership requires vision, charisma, authority. You're better suited to support. As if I were a piece of office furniture, something that held weight but was never meant to be seen. I wanted to argue. I wanted to open that binder and shove the evidence under her nose and demand she explain how adequate work had kept her department from collapsing more than once. But I didn't. I just nodded, thanked her for her time, and walked out. My colleagues were waiting outside the office, curious looks on their faces. "How did it go?" someone whispered. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. Then I went back to my desk, opened my email, and pretended I hadn't just had years of my life dismissed in 3 sentences. That evening, when 5 o'clock came, I didn't stay late. For the first time in years, I actually packed up my things on time. My coworkers noticed, of course. "Half day for you?" one of them joked. I laughed politely, but inside, something had shifted. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. I stared out the window, Jessica's words replaying in my mind. Adequate, support, not suitable. My chest ached with a strange mix of shame and anger. I had done everything right, everything they tell you to do. Work hard, stay loyal, be patient. And all it had gotten me was a polite rejection and a label I couldn't shake off. That night, I sat in my apartment in silence. No music, no TV, just me and the sound of the fridge humming. I kept opening my laptop, staring at the blank screen, then closing it again. I couldn't even bring myself to answer the few messages from friends asking if I wanted to meet up. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to hear myself say out loud that after all my sacrifices, my boss thought I was nothing more than adequate. But as the hours passed, something hardened inside me. For years, I had believed that if I worked hard enough, if I kept proving myself, one day recognition would come. Now I understood it wasn't coming. Not from Jessica, not from this company. If hard work wasn't enough, then I needed a different strategy. I didn't know what that strategy would be yet, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to let Jessica's words be the final verdict on my career. She thought I would take her rejection quietly and go back to being invisible. She thought I would keep being the person who made her life easier without ever asking for more. She was wrong. And though I didn't realize it that night, Jessica's dismissal had just set something in motion that neither of us could stop. The first morning I didn't arrive early. I could feel the shift the moment I walked through the doors. For years, people had grown accustomed to finding me already there before them, hunched over my desk with a half-empty coffee cup, reviewing reports, or fixing some urgent problem someone had dumped in my inbox after hours. I used to tell myself I didn't mind. It felt almost noble to be the one who kept everything together while others strolled in at 9, yawning and stretching. But that morning, I walked in at exactly 8:59, coat still buttoned, hair slightly windblown, and heads actually turned. "Rough commute?" one of my colleagues asked, eyebrows raised. "No," I said simply, placing my bag down and powering on my computer. I didn't bother to explain. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The truth was, I'd made a decision after Jessica's rejection. I was done giving this place pieces of myself it didn't deserve. No more unpaid hours. No more rescuing people who couldn't manage their own deadlines. No more sacrificing my life outside these walls for the illusion of recognition that was never going to come. At first, the change was subtle. I stopped replying to late-night emails. I stopped volunteering for the urgent weekend tasks that mysteriously always fell into my lap. If someone asked me to cover for them in a meeting, I smiled and said, "Sorry, I can't." The first few times, people looked startled, as if I had spoken in another language. "Claire, you're usually so helpful," one of the analysts remarked when I declined to review her slides for a presentation. "I've got my own workload," I replied, my tone polite but firm. The words tasted strange in my mouth at first, but also liberating. For years, my colleagues had relied on me as a safety net. If someone missed a deadline, I quietly picked it up. If a client was upset, I smoothed things over. If a report was riddled with mistakes, I stayed late to fix it before anyone noticed. And because I never complained, they began to treat it as my role rather than my choice. I wasn't just Claire, the analyst. I was Claire, the backup plan. Not anymore. What surprised me most was not the shock on their faces, but the fact that no one knew what to do without me. A junior associate missed an important deadline because she assumed, as always, that I would check her work before submission. A project manager sent out incomplete data to a client, forgetting that I was the one who usually caught the errors. And for the first time in years, I didn't swoop in to save the day. I let the mistakes land exactly where they belonged. By 5 o'clock, when everyone else was still scrambling, I closed my laptop, packed my things, and walked out. The cool evening air hit me like a revelation. I hadn't left on time in so long that I'd forgotten what the city felt like at that hour. The sidewalks still buzzing, shops still open, the sky only beginning to turn gold. Usually, when I walked home, the streets were nearly empty and the restaurants were closing. But now I had time. Time for my daughter. For years, I had convinced myself that she didn't mind. That as long as I was providing for her, as long as she had food and clothes and a safe home, it didn't matter that I was rarely there for dinner or bedtime stories. But that night, when I walked through the door at 6 instead of 9, the look on her face nearly broke me. "Mom," she said, her eyes wide, "you're home already?" "Yes," I smiled, dropping my bag. "I am." She hugged me so tightly I had to laugh. We cooked dinner together, simple pasta, nothing fancy, and she told me about her day at school, her friends, the art project she was working on. For the first time in years, I listened without glancing at my phone, without mentally running through unfinished tasks at work. After dinner, we watched a movie, curled up on the couch. She fell asleep before it ended, her head on my shoulder. That was the moment I realized what freedom felt like. The next day, I did it again, and the day after that. And each time, the company began to fray a little more without me. Emails went unanswered because I wasn't there at midnight to respond. Reports piled up because I wasn't quietly correcting them after hours. Meetings ran off track because I wasn't there early to prepare the materials. The cracks were small at first, an irritated client here, a delayed project there. But I saw them. I saw how fragile everything really was once I stopped holding it together. And the best part? No one could blame me. I was doing my job, exactly my job. Nothing more, nothing less. By the second week, the whispers started. "Claire seems different lately," I overheard one colleague say. "She's not pulling the same weight," another replied. I almost laughed. Not pulling the same weight? I had been carrying the entire department for years. They just never noticed because I made it look effortless. Now, stripped of my invisible support, they were realizing how much they had depended on me. Jessica, of course, pretended not to notice at first. She still breezed into meetings with her sharp suits and sharper comments, acting as though everything was under control. But I could see the irritation in her eyes when clients asked why deliverables were late. I could see the tension in her jaw when reports came back with errors. And though she didn't say it, I knew she was thinking it. Where was Claire? I was at home, with my daughter, living a life she thought I didn't deserve. Evenings became sacred. We tried new recipes, went for walks, even painted one night, both of us laughing at how terrible we were at it. My daughter started telling me things she hadn't before. Worries, dreams, little details about her life that I had missed by always being too busy. I realized how much of her childhood had slipped through my fingers while I was chasing recognition from people who would never give it. One evening, as we sat on the floor putting together a puzzle, she looked at me and said softly, "I like this version of you better." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "You're not tired all the time. You're not always on your computer. You're just here." That was when it hit me. I had been absent, even when I was physically present. I had given my company the best years of my energy, and in return, they had called me adequate. But my daughter, who never asked for perfection, only presence, was giving me back something far more valuable than any promotion: herself. Meanwhile, at work, things were unraveling faster. A client pulled out of a deal because their requests weren't handled properly. A project failed its audit because details had slipped through the cracks. People were stressed, snapping at each other in hallways. I kept my head down, doing what was asked of me, and nothing more. For once, I wasn't the one smoothing over tempers or patching holes. I let the chaos belong to the people who had created it. Jessica finally called me into her office at the end of the third week. She looked me up and down, her eyes sharp. "Claire," she said, "is everything all right? You don't seem as—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Proactive as you used to be." I smiled faintly. "Everything's fine. I'm just focusing on my responsibilities." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. Because what could she say? I was doing my job. She couldn't accuse me of slacking, because the truth was, I was still meeting every expectation. I just wasn't exceeding them anymore. And without my invisible labor, the cracks were widening into fractures. I left her office, walked to my desk, and calmly packed up at 5 o'clock sharp. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying anyone else's burdens. I was just carrying my own. And it felt like freedom. The crisis began with a phone call. It was just after 4 on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of slow hour when people start thinking about dinner plans and half the office is already mentally checked out. I was reviewing a routine report when Jessica swept past my desk, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She was holding her phone to her ear, her voice clipped, the way it got when she was trying to mask panic. "Yes, of course. We'll have that turned around immediately," she said, nodding, although the caller couldn't see her. "You'll have the new version tonight." She hung up, turned, and scanned the office like a hawk. "Claire," she barked, "my office." Now I followed her in, though not as quickly as I once would have. She gestured for me to sit, but didn't wait before launching into her explanation. "That was Brockwell Industries," she said. "They're demanding urgent changes to the supply chain proposal. Apparently, there's a compliance issue with the way the data was modeled. They want the revisions before tomorrow morning." I blinked. "That proposal has more than 200 interdependent variables. If one part shifts, the whole thing has to be recalculated." "I'm aware," Jessica said sharply. "So you'll need to get started immediately." Something in her tone made me pause. The old me, the Claire who lived on coffee and stress and stayed until midnight without complaint, would have already opened my laptop and started pulling numbers. But the new me, the one who had learned that sacrificing myself earned me nothing but the label adequate, leaned back in the chair instead. "I can help," I said evenly, "but my shift ends in less than an hour." Jessica stared at me as if I had spoken another language. "Claire, this is a priority client. If we don't deliver, we could lose them." I folded my hands in my lap. "Then we'll need to plan properly tomorrow morning. I'll start on it at 9. For a moment, I thought she might actually scream. Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flared. "You've always been willing to stay late before," she said. "Yes," I replied, my voice calm, "and it's never been recognized. My contract says I work until 5. I'll be happy to take this on during working hours." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Jessica finally exhaled through her nose, then stood abruptly. "Fine, I'll handle it." She grabbed the thick proposal binder from her shelf, her movements sharp. "But I expect you in here first thing tomorrow." I nodded, stood, and walked out. At exactly 5 o'clock, I closed my laptop, packed my bag, and left the building. That night, while Jessica and whoever she managed to rope into helping her were drowning in numbers, I was at home, cooking dinner with my daughter. We ate slowly, talked about her day, and afterward, we sat on the couch, watching a show she loved. For once, my mind wasn't in 2 places at once. I wasn't half listening while mentally revising spreadsheets. I was just present. It was a simple evening, but it felt revolutionary. Meanwhile, at the office, chaos had begun. The next morning, I arrived at 9 sharp to find the entire department buzzing like a hornet's nest. People were running back and forth between desks, papers stacked in messy piles, voices raised in frustration. I slipped off my coat and quietly made my way to my desk. "Claire!" One of the project managers rushed over, his face pale. "Do you know how the compliance formulas are linked in the Brockwell file? Jessica's been trying to update them, but the whole system keeps crashing." I looked at my screen calmly. "The documentation is in my notes," I said. "Where?" he asked, desperation in his voice. "In my notebook," I replied, gesturing to the small stack of binders on my desk, "which I'll open when I start work." He blinked. "But," Jessica said. "I'll start at 9, I repeated. He hesitated, then hurried off, clearly too afraid to go back to Jessica empty-handed. Within half an hour, I could hear Jessica's voice carrying down the hallway. She was on a conference call, trying to explain why the updated proposal hadn't been sent yet. "We're finalizing the adjustments as we speak," she said, her tone strained. "Our team is on it." Except they weren't. I knew what she didn't. The system I had built to handle those variables was intricate, designed to catch inconsistencies before they collapsed the entire model. Without my annotations, the ones I had kept in my private notes, no one could navigate it properly. It was too complex, too interwoven. They could poke at it, but every adjustment would break something else. And that was exactly what was happening. By 10, people were snapping at each other openly. "You didn't lock the formula correctly!" someone shouted across the room. "Now all the data's shifted." "I followed the instructions," another retorted. "There are no instructions," a third voice chimed in. I sipped my coffee, opened my email, and went about my morning routine as if nothing unusual were happening. Inside, though, I felt a strange mix of emotions, part guilt, part vindication. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply stopped saving them. And now, they were realizing just how much of their stability had been built on my invisible labor. At 10:30, Jessica stormed out of her office, her face flushed. "Claire!" she snapped. "In here!" Now I set down my coffee and followed. She shut the door behind me, her movements sharp. "This system you created," she said through clenched teeth. "Why is there no documentation?" "There is," I replied calmly. "I keep it in my personal notes." Her eyes narrowed. "Why haven't you shared them?" "Because no one ever asked," I said, "and because I was always the one handling it." I didn't think it was necessary. Jessica's hands slammed against the desk. "It is necessary now." I tilted my head slightly. "Then I'll be happy to provide guidance." During working hours, she looked as though she might actually throw something. "The client is furious, Claire. If we don't deliver by noon, this account is gone. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes," I said softly. "I do." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She knew better than to outright order me to stay late. It wasn't in my contract, and she couldn't force me. But I could see the rage simmering beneath her polished exterior. "I need you to fix this," she said finally, her voice low and tight. I met her gaze evenly. "I'll do everything I can between now and 5. For the first time in my career, I watched Jessica falter. She was used to commanding, to snapping her fingers and having me jump. But now, the power dynamic had shifted ever so slightly. She needed me, and I knew it. The rest of the day was a spectacle. Colleagues hovered nervously around my desk, whispering, "Can you look at this?" Or, "Do you know why it's doing that?" I answered in clipped, professional tones, moving only as quickly as my contracted hours allowed. Every so often, I heard Jessica on the phone again, her voice dripping with false confidence as she tried to assure Brockwell that everything was under control. By 4 o'clock, I had stabilized part of the system enough to prevent total collapse, but the final calculations would take hours. Jessica hovered in the doorway of my office space, her eyes pleading though her words remained sharp. "Claire, we need this finished tonight." I shut down my computer. "Then we'll continue tomorrow." The look on her face was priceless. Part fury, part disbelief, part realization that she had underestimated me. As I walked out at exactly 5 o'clock, the office still in chaos behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I wasn't the one carrying the panic home with me. I wasn't sacrificing my evening, my daughter, my sanity. I was free. And Jessica was learning, the hard way, what happens when you call someone adequate while standing on the foundation they built. The summons came mid-morning. I was at my desk, quietly reviewing routine data, while the office buzzed with the fallout from yesterday's disaster. The Brockwell account was still teetering, clients were furious, and half the staff looked like they hadn't slept. Jessica had been storming in and out of her office since 8 o'clock, her phone glued to her hand, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. At 10:15, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Emergency meeting, conference room A, attendance required." My stomach tightened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral as I gathered my notebook. By the time I arrived, the room was already full. Jessica sat at the head of the table, her posture stiff, a stack of disheveled papers in front of her. Beside her was Martin Hayes, the regional director, a man I had only met twice before, both times in passing. His presence meant one thing. This was serious. Around the table, managers and team leads whispered nervously. When I walked in, their eyes followed me in a way that felt different from usual, expectant, almost desperate. "Claire," Jessica said, forcing a thin smile, "please sit." I did. The meeting began with Martin clearing his throat. "We have a situation," he said plainly. "Brockwell Industries is threatening to terminate their contract unless the revised proposal is delivered by tomorrow morning. This account represents nearly 12% of our regional revenue. Losing it would be catastrophic." No one spoke. Jessica adjusted her blazer, then looked directly at me. "Claire," she said smoothly, "you know this system better than anyone. We need you to take the lead on resolving the compliance issues. I'll authorize over time, of course." I sat very still, my hands folded neatly on the table. Everyone in the room leaned forward slightly, waiting for me to agree the way I always had. But I didn't. Instead, I looked Jessica in the eye and said, "No." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "No?" Jessica repeated, her voice incredulous. "That's correct," I said calmly. "My contract is clear. I work until 5. I've spent years going beyond that without recognition. I'm not doing it anymore." A murmur rippled through the room. Jessica's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Martin leaned forward, studying me with interest rather than anger. "Claire," he said carefully, "are you saying you won't assist with this project?" "I'll do my part during working hours," I replied. "But the kind of overhaul you're asking for, this is a job for an entire team, not one person pulling an all-nighter." Jessica interjected, her voice sharp. "Claire, be reasonable. You've always been the one who handles these situations. You know the system, the clients trust you, and frankly, we can't do this without you. If it's a matter of recognition—" She hesitated, then forced the words out. "We can discuss a promotion." There it was. The thing I had wanted for years, dangled in front of me like a bribe, a promotion in exchange for saving her again. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said quietly, "Jessica, you told me I wasn't suitable for a promotion, that I didn't have the right qualities for leadership, remember?" Her face drained of color. Around the table, eyes widened. No one dared speak. "And," I continued, my voice steady, "it's too late. I already have another offer." The effect was immediate. Jessica's head snapped up. Martin's eyebrows rose. Several managers exchanged stunned glances. "What offer?" Jessica demanded, her voice sharper than ever. "From a competitor," I said simply. "They reached out last week. They know my work, and they value it." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in Jessica's eyes. She opened her mouth, but Martin raised a hand to stop her. "Claire," he said carefully, "can you elaborate on this offer?" "I can't share details," I replied, "but I can say this. It comes with a significant salary increase, full recognition of my contributions, and leadership responsibilities." The room fell silent again. Everyone knew what this meant. If I left, the system I had built, the system no one else could fully manage, would crumble. And unlike before, I wasn't bluffing. Martin leaned back in his chair, regarding me with a thoughtful expression. "You've clearly been undervalued here," he said finally. "That's a mistake on our part." "I'd like to correct it. What would it take for you to stay?" The words might have thrilled me once, but not anymore. I closed my notebook and placed my pen neatly on top of it. "Thank you, Martin." But I've already made my decision. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. My resignation letter. The gasp that went around the room was almost theatrical. Jessica's hand shot out, snatching the paper, her eyes scanning it as if it might disappear. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You can't just walk out in the middle of a crisis." "I can," I said softly. "And I am." Martin picked up the letter from Jessica's shaking hands, reading it carefully. When he looked back at me, his expression was not angry, but resigned. "Effective immediately?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Effective immediately." Jessica slammed the paper back onto the table. "This is betrayal," she hissed. "After everything I've done for you." I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. "Everything you've done for me. You called my work adequate. You dismissed me as support. You told me I wasn't leadership material. Now, when you need me, suddenly I'm valuable?" "No, Jessica, I won't be used like that anymore." The room was dead silent. Every manager, every colleague, was staring at me with wide eyes, as if I had just set off an explosion in the middle of the table. I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. "I'll submit the formal paperwork to HR by the end of the day." "Thank you," and with that, I walked out. The rest of the day was a blur of whispers, shocked faces, and unanswered questions. People stopped by my desk, their voices hushed. "Is it true?" one colleague whispered. "You're leaving?" "Yes," I said simply, packing up my belongings. "But what will we do without you?" I looked at her evenly. "You'll manage. Or you won't. Either way, it's no longer my responsibility." Jessica didn't come out of her office again. I suspected she was on the phone with Martin, scrambling for damage control. But it didn't matter. My decision was final. At 5 o'clock, I walked out of the building for the last time. No tears, no regrets. Just a quiet sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. And as I stepped into the evening air, my phone buzzed with a new message. 76 missed calls. I had barely finished clearing out my desk when the email arrived. Subject: Meeting request. Director Hayes. Time: 2:30 p.m. Location: Executive Office, 14th floor. It was short, almost clinical. But the sender's name made me pause. Martin Hayes, the regional director. I almost laughed. Hours ago, I had been just another employee in Jessica's department, dismissed as adequate, and shuffled into corners no one else wanted to sit in. Now, after one resignation letter, the regional director himself wanted to see me. I gathered my bag, walked past the wide eyes of my colleagues, and pressed the button for the elevator. The ride up to the 14th floor felt longer than any I'd taken before. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked calmer than I felt. Martin's assistant ushered me into his office, a wide space with glass walls overlooking the city. It was the kind of room designed to make you feel small, but I didn't feel small anymore. Martin rose from behind his desk, extending a hand. "Claire, thank you for coming." I shook it firmly. "Of course." He gestured to a leather chair. "Please, sit." I did, placing my bag neatly at my feet. Martin sat across from me, folding his hands together. He was a man used to control, but I could see it in his eyes. Today, I was the one holding it. "I'll be direct," he said. "I read your resignation, and I can't let you go." "Not like this," I raised an eyebrow. "Jessica seemed willing to." His lips tightened, just enough to betray irritation. "Jessica has made mistakes. Mistakes I should have caught sooner, but I won't repeat them. The truth is, Claire, you're more than an analyst. You're the backbone of this region's operations, whether anyone's admitted it or not. And losing you right now, in the middle of the Brockwell crisis." He shook his head. "It's not an option." I didn't speak. I wanted him to feel the silence. Finally, he leaned forward. "I'm prepared to offer you a new position, Director of Operations. You'd report directly to me. Full authority over systems, process design, and staff management. And, of course, a salary adjustment." He slid a sheet of paper across the desk. I glanced down at the numbers, and my stomach twisted. Double my current salary. Benefits, stock options, a budget that would actually match the scope of the role. It was everything I had wanted for years. Recognition, authority, power. And yet, "Claire," Martin said quietly, reading my hesitation, "this isn't charity. This is overdue. We should have seen your value sooner. I'm sorry it took a crisis to get here." I took a slow breath, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper. Once upon a time, I would have grabbed it without question, signed, smiled, and thanked him for finally seeing what I had always known. But that was before Jessica's words, before the years of missed evenings and ignored sacrifices, before the competitor's offer. Because I did have another offer, a real one, a chance to leave all of this behind and start fresh in a place that wanted me from the beginning, not as a last-minute save. And that was the difference. For the first time in my career, I wasn't trapped. I had a choice. "Martin," I said finally, my voice steady, "I appreciate this, truly. But why now? Why only after I resigned? Why not after the systems I built saved millions? Why not after I pulled the company through crisis after crisis?" He sighed, leaning back. "Because this company is run by people. And people are flawed. Recognition doesn't always come at the right time. But I'm here now, correcting it." I studied him. He wasn't like Jessica. He wasn't cruel or dismissive. He was pragmatic. He saw the numbers, the risk, the reality. And he saw me. But still, a part of me couldn't shake the thought, if I hadn't resigned, would anyone have cared? "I already have an offer," I said softly. His eyes sharpened. "From a competitor?" I nodded. "Is it better than mine?" I paused. "It's different. It's a clean slate, no baggage, no years of being invisible." The words hung heavy between us. Martin tapped his fingers against the desk once, then stilled them. "You want freedom," he said finally, "and I can't blame you. But Claire, freedom doesn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it means taking the power you've earned and wielding it where it matters most. Here, you wouldn't be invisible anymore. You'd be running operations." I exhaled slowly. His words struck somewhere deep, in the place that still wanted validation, still wanted to prove Jessica wrong. To stand at the front of the room one day and have everyone know I was the one in charge, not her. But then I thought of my daughter. I thought of the evenings we had spent together in the past few weeks, the laughter, the warmth, the way she looked at me and said she liked this version of me better. What would happen if I stepped into this new role? More money, yes, more power. But would it cost me that freedom I had just begun to taste? Martin watched me carefully, his gaze steady. "I won't ask for an answer today. Take the weekend. Think it over. Come back to me Monday morning with your decision." I nodded slowly. "All right." "Good," he said, standing. "Because Claire, whether you realize it or not, you're the most valuable person in this building." Don't forget that I rose, shook his hand, and left the office. The elevator ride down felt surreal. The resignation letter in my bag was still valid, but now so was this offer. Director of Operations. Double salary, authority, recognition. And yet, the competitor's offer still sat in my inbox, waiting. A fresh start. No Jessica, no politics, no years of bitterness. Just a chance to rebuild somewhere new, on my own terms. For the first time, the choice was mine. Not forced, not an illusion, real. As I stepped out of the building into the crisp afternoon air, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the competitor's recruiter, reminding me their offer still stood. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a faint smile on my lips. For once, I wasn't scrambling to prove my worth. I wasn't begging for scraps of recognition. I was the one with the power, and I intended to use it. Jessica cornered me on Friday afternoon, just before I left for the weekend. I had almost made it to the elevator when I heard the sharp clack of her heels behind me. "Claire," she called, her voice tight but sugar-coated. I turned slowly, keeping my face neutral. She looked polished as always, her blazer crisp, her makeup flawless, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Panic thinly disguised as poise. "Ow, I wanted to explain," she said, lowering her voice as she stepped closer. "About the promotion you applied for. I may have given you the wrong impression. I almost laughed, but I stayed silent, waiting. She smoothed her hair, her tone suddenly soft, almost maternal. "I didn't say you weren't qualified." "Not really. The truth is, I didn't put you forward because I didn't want to lose you from my team. You're the one I can always count on. You've kept us afloat for years. If you'd moved up, someone else would have taken you away from me. And I couldn't risk that." Her words hung between us like perfume that was already fading. She waited for me to look relieved, to soften, to accept this as some kind of backhanded compliment. But all I felt was a cold clarity settling in my chest. So that was it. Not that I lacked vision. Not that I wasn't leadership material. She had lied. She had kept me small because it suited her, because I was useful to her as the invisible one who did the work, while she collected the praise. In her own way, she had admitted it. I hadn't been overlooked because I wasn't good enough. I had been used. "Thank you for clarifying," I said calmly, pressing the elevator button. Her eyes flickered, searching for some sign of forgiveness. "Claire, I value you more than you know." The doors opened. I stepped inside. "I know exactly how much you value me," I said softly, and let the doors close on her stunned face. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after my daughter went to bed, sipping tea that had gone cold. I should have felt triumphant, maybe even vindicated, but instead, I felt unsettled. Jessica's excuse, pathetic as it was, forced me to admit something to myself. I had let her use me. I had allowed it, year after year, because I thought it was the path to recognition. My phone buzzed. It was my sister, Natalie, calling from across town. She had a way of knowing when I needed her. "You sound tense," she said immediately after I picked up. I sighed. "It's been a week." "Tell me." So I did. I told her about Jessica's sudden confession about Martin's offer, about the competitor's offer waiting in my inbox, and about the strange, heavy silence in my chest every time I thought about choosing. She listened, then said, in the blunt way only sisters can, "Claire, do you secretly just want to see Jessica humiliated? Is that what this is really about?" The question hit me like a slap. At first, I wanted to protest, to insist that no, of course not, I was above that. But the longer I sat with it, the more I realized I needed to be honest. Not with her, but with myself. I closed my eyes. "No," I said finally. "I don't want revenge. I don't want her destroyed. I just want recognition, real recognition. For once in my life, I want to walk into a room and not be the invisible one holding everything together in silence. I want my name attached to what I built." Natalie was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "Then don't make your choice about her. Make it about you, about the future you want." Her words settled into me like stones finding their place at the bottom of a pond. Simple, solid. True. All weekend I thought about it. I took long walks with my daughter, cooked, cleaned, even read a book for the first time in months. But in every quiet moment, the decision hovered. Martin's offer meant power, but it also meant responsibility that could consume me again. The competitor's offer meant freedom, but it meant starting over in a world where I'd have to prove myself all over again. Sunday night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, and I finally understood. This wasn't about choosing the easier path. It was about choosing the path where my voice mattered. By Monday morning, I knew what I had to do. Martin was waiting in his office when I arrived. He looked up from his desk, his expression expectant. "Claire, have you made your decision?" I nodded. "I'll accept your offer." Relief flickered across his face, quickly masked by professionalism. "Excellent. I'll have HR draft the contract today." "On 2 conditions," I added. His eyebrows rose. "Go on." "First," I said, my voice steady, "I want complete autonomy in forming my team. No hand-picked managers, no leftover staff forced on me. I choose who I work with, and I answer directly to you." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair. And the second?" I took a breath. "Jessica stays where she is." The room went utterly still. Even Martin, usually so composed, looked momentarily stunned. "You want her to stay?" "Yes," I said firmly. "She keeps her title. She keeps her position. I don't want her demoted or replaced. I want her exactly where she is." For a moment, Martin just stared at me, searching my face as though waiting for the catch. Finally, he leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his lips. "You've thought this through," he said. "I have," I replied. "Removing her would cause chaos. People would side with her out of loyalty or out of fear. But if she stays where she is, while I build operations under my authority, everyone will see the truth for themselves. That's not revenge, that's politics, and politics is part of leadership." For the first time, Martin laughed, a low, genuine sound. "You're right. And frankly, it shows exactly why you deserve this role. You're not just thinking about the work, you're thinking about the power structure." "That's rare. Do we have an agreement?" I asked. He extended his hand. "We do." I shook it, feeling a quiet surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Real control. When I walked back into the department later that morning, whispers followed me. Everyone knew something had shifted. Jessica looked up from her office, her eyes narrowing as she saw me walk past, calm and steady. She didn't know yet, but soon she would. And when she did, she'd finally see what she had tried to bury for years. Not just that I was capable, but that I was powerful. Not because I sought revenge, because I demanded recognition. And this time, I was going to get it. The announcement went out on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, sipping coffee, when the email hit everyone's inbox at once. Subject: Leadership Update. My name was in bold in the very first line. "We are pleased to announce the appointment of Claire Thompson as Director of Operations, effective immediately. Claire has demonstrated exceptional contributions in systems optimization, client retention, and process design. She will report directly to Regional Director Hayes and will oversee all operational initiatives moving forward." I read it twice, not because I doubted it, but because for years I had dreamed of seeing my name attached to something official, something real. And there it was. The effect was immediate. People who had walked past me for years without acknowledgement suddenly stopped by my desk with congratulations. Smiles that had once been dismissive now looked eager. One colleague, who used to dump her unfinished tasks on me without thanks, actually brought me coffee to celebrate. I accepted politely, but inside I couldn't forget how easily they had ignored me when I was invisible. That was the strange thing about power. It didn't change who you were, but it changed how others saw you. The biggest shift, of course, was Jessica. When I passed her office, she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Later that day, she appeared at my door, knocking lightly before stepping in. "Congratulations," she said, her tone clipped. Well deserved. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice even. She hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. Then she added, almost reluctantly, I want you to know, Claire, when I didn't support your promotion earlier, it wasn't because you weren't qualified. It was because you were my foundation. I couldn't risk losing you from my team. Her voice cracked slightly on the word foundation. Once, those words might have melted me. I might have seen them as proof that I mattered, even if she hadn't said it outright before. But now, they sounded like what they were. An admission that she had kept me small because it benefited her. I met her gaze. I understand, I said softly. And I won't forget it. Her smile faltered, just for a moment. Then she nodded stiffly and left. My first official act as director was to build my team, and I knew exactly where to start. With the people who had been underestimated, the ones overlooked in the same way I had been. There was Sam, a quiet analyst whose reports were always flawless, but who was ignored because he didn't speak loudly in meetings. There was Lila, an assistant project manager who had been stuck handling paperwork, but who had a sharp eye for strategy. There was Aaron, a developer who had been sidelined because English wasn't his first language, even though his code was impeccable. One by one, I invited them into my office. Their eyes widened when I explained my vision. A team built on skill, not politics. A place where credit would flow to the people who earned it. You're serious? Lila asked, her voice cautious. Completely, I said. I know what it's like to be overlooked. I won't let that happen to you. For the first time, I saw her straighten her shoulders as though she actually believed it. We got to work immediately. The first thing I did was eliminate unnecessary overtime. For years, the unspoken rule had been that work was endless, that employees were expected to sacrifice their evenings and weekends just as I had. I scrapped that culture overnight. No one stayed past 5 unless they chose to. No more silent punishments for leaving too early. The effect was stunning. At first, people didn't trust it. They lingered at their desks, watching me out of the corner of their eyes, as if waiting for me to call them lazy. But when I left at 5 sharp, walking out confidently with my team, they slowly followed. Within weeks, the entire floor looked different. People came in refreshed, energized. Productivity rose, not fell. The second thing I did was streamline the chaotic processes that had buried us for years. Instead of endless email chains, I introduced clear reporting structures. Instead of duplicate efforts across departments, I created centralized documentation. Small changes, but powerful ones. And the results spoke for themselves. Projects that used to drag for weeks finished in half the time. Client complaints dropped dramatically. For the first time in years, people weren't scrambling at the last minute. They were actually ahead of schedule. The clients noticed too. Brockwell Industries, the account that had nearly collapsed, asked specifically for my team on their next project. You're the only ones we trust to get this right, their representative said on a call. Soon after, 2 other major clients followed suit, requesting that their projects be assigned directly to my group. It was subtle at first, but the message was clear. The clients knew where the competence lived. Not with Jessica, with me. Of course, that caused ripples internally. Other managers whispered that I was cherry-picking talent, or that I was making everyone else look bad. But the truth was simpler. I was proving that efficiency, fairness, and respect worked better than fear and exploitation. And deep down, I think they knew it. One afternoon, Martin stopped by my office, leaning casually against the doorframe. You're making waves, he said. Good waves, I hope, I replied. The best kind, he said, smiling faintly. Clients are happy. Your team's performance is outstanding, and frankly, morale in your department is higher than I've ever seen it. I nodded, but inside, a quiet satisfaction burned. For years, I had been told I wasn't leadership material, that I was support, that I was adequate. Now, those same voices were silent, drowned out by results they couldn't ignore. Jessica avoided me most of the time, though I caught her watching my team occasionally, her expression unreadable. Once, I overheard her telling someone, Claire was always the backbone. I said no to her promotion because I couldn't lose her. It was meant to sound like praise, but to me, it was confirmation of everything I already knew. I had been used. Not because I lacked ability, but because my silence benefited her. The difference now was that I wasn't silent anymore. One evening, as my team wrapped up a project ahead of schedule, I watched them laughing together, their desks already cleared before 5. It struck me that this was what leadership should feel like. Not exhaustion, not resentment, but pride. Pride in giving others the recognition they deserved. For the first time, I realized I didn't just have power. I had influence, and I intended to use it wisely.